I'm delivering my favorite free agent targets for the Buffalo Bills at defensive end and cornerback today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, welcome in. Yesterday on the podcast, I previewed my favorite free agent targets for the Bills at wide receiver and defensive tackle. Today, we're doing the same for defensive end and cornerback. And of course, I've identified what I believe are the primary needs for this football team as receiver, defensive end, defensive tackle, and cornerback. And because of that, I'm focusing our free agency previews on those positions. And so that's what we're going to do today. We'll start with defensive ends. I'll talk about a couple of buyer beware targets, and then we'll talk cornerbacks as well. But let's start with the defensive ends. And this is a big need. This is a really important need. The Bills need impact at defensive end from some players that aren't Greg Rousseau. And Dwan Smoot's a free agent. They have a decision to make on Von Miller. But the bottom line here is there is a lot of room for impact, and I think the Bills need to add talent. And so when I think about where the most significant resources for the Buffalo Bills should be invested this offseason, it's right here at the defensive end position. Now, obviously, there's a lot of really fun ideas about trading for a Myles Garrett or maybe a Trey Hendrickson. Sure, love the idea. We're talking free agent targets today. So if the Bills don't go that route, here's some guys that they can consider. And by far, my favorite defensive end that I watched on film in this free agent class is Josh Sweat from the Philadelphia Eagles. He turns 28 in March, 6'4" and 3/4, 265 pounds, 34 and 5/8 inch arms, 10 and a quarter inch hands. RAS score of a 9.71 out of 10. Had a terrific season last year. 8 sacks, 66 pressures, 14% pass rush win rate. Of course, had a great showing in the Super Bowl win for the Eagles over the Chiefs. Collected 2.5 sacks, 3 quarterback hits, and 39 pass rushing snaps. Oh, by the way, in Patrick Mahomes' 4 career playoff games against Buffalo, he was sacked a total of 5 times. So you love that, right? You saw Josh Sweat do the thing to the Chiefs' offensive tackles that the Bills couldn't do. And I just watched the film, and I really like what I saw. He's a balanced defender. He can defend the run. I love the pass rush arsenal. He's quick. He's flexible. He's got a lot of different pass rush moves. His go-to is a chop-rip combo, which is lethal. And it really shows off that length, the flexibility, his ability to soften a rush angle, and his ability to get through that rush angle. I love that he's been a scheme-transcendent player. He's played under 4 different defensive coordinators in the last 5 years with the Eagles, and he's been very consistent with his impact every single season. I'm a big fan of Josh Sweat, and that comes from studying the film. I watched the film on these players, folks. I didn't come here just offering ideas because I looked at a list. I studied the tape. Josh Sweat can ball. Now, he doesn't come without some concerns. He's had some big injuries, not really in the NFL, though. High school senior in 2014, he dislocated his kneecap and tore the ACL in his left knee. That required immediate surgery, and there was some fear that an amputation would be needed. 2016 at Florida State, tore the meniscus in his left knee, also required surgery. The next year at Florida State, he tore the ligaments in his finger that required surgery. But then in the NFL, the only real thing of note was in 2023, he actually missed the Eagles' playoff loss to the Buccaneers because the Tuesday before the game, he was admitted to the hospital and underwent an emergency procedure for a life-threatening situation, and he missed the game. So he's been healthy, but you can't ignore that this guy's had some problems with that left knee, right? A dislocated kneecap, torn ACL, and torn meniscus. That's a lot going on there in that left knee, but it's held up. But of course, it's something to be mindful of. SpotRack projects that he gets a contract that pays him $18.8 million a season. PFF has it at $18 million. I think those numbers are low. I think it's going to be between $20 and $25 million comfortably to sign Josh Sweat, and that doesn't scare me at all. I think that's a perfectly reasonable range for him. I do that and pay Greg Rousseau, and I think you'd like the outlook for your defensive end position moving forward. And so you don't get Myles Garrett or Trey Hendrickson. A heck of a consolation prize would be Josh Sweat, by far the best pass rusher, edge rusher that I watched in this free agent class. So that's my favorite target. I hope the Bills sign Josh Sweat. Another player that I hope the Bills sign, and this is not nearly the same caliber of player, but a guy that I think would be extremely useful for the Bills, is Deatrich Wise. He's 31 years old, or he turns 31 in July. He's been on the New England Patriots, was a 2017 fourth-round pick. 6'5", 280, 35 and 5/8 inch arms, 10.5 inch hands, RAS score of an 8.18 out of 10. Last year, he had 5 sacks, 20 pressures, and a pass rush win rate of 11.6%. And the Bills really like Dwayne Smoot and the idea of this player that can really be a defensive end, but reduce inside and rush interior gaps. And I think that's exactly what Deatrich Wise is, but a souped up version. You know, he can play outside on rundowns, rush inside, got a lot of length and, experience playing in the B gaps, over 900 career snaps lining up in the B gap. And I think for a player that fits that type of role, even going back a couple of years ago, Shaq Lawson did this for the Bills. And so if the Bills wanted to have what I think is a better version of Dwayne Smoot in that same type of role, I think this would be a slam dunk signing. He's been a consistently durable player, and SpotRack only estimates a salary of $2.1 million per season. And so, look, Deatrich Wise doesn't solve all of the problems that the Bills have for defensive line impact, but I think there's a very straightforward role for him. And I think if you were to take Josh Sweat plus Deatrich Wise plus a draft pick, one of those first 3 draft picks, the Bills have a first rounder and 2 twos, you're well on your way to having a lot more impact off of your edge rushers. And then you sign a defensive tackle, which I talked about yesterday. Maybe you sign a Bobby Brown and then you draft a TJ Sanders out of South Carolina that gives you some pass rushing upside on the interior. I'd be really satisfied with something like that. That's a very straightforward path to me that makes a lot of sense to intelligently use your free agent dollars, double down with some draft capital, and load up this defensive line. I think there's a very clear path to doing this. I think that's what I've enjoyed about researching all the options, is that you can come away with, it doesn't have to be Myles Garrett or bust. It doesn't have to be Trey Hendrickson or bust. You can do multiple things here that are fully within your capacity to do, and feel like you've really infused your defensive line with a lot of players. Let me let you in on a secret. The Philadelphia Eagles, who everyone is envious of, that defensive line, right? Everybody loved it. And it's the talk of the league. And boy, if you want to beat the Chiefs, you better get this defensive line. They don't have a player like Myles Garrett. They don't have Myles Garrett, right? They don't have anybody like Myles Garrett. What they have are a bunch of Josh Sweats and a Milton Williams and good veteran players that come in, a Brandon Graham. That's what they have. They have 7, 8 guys that are really good. They didn't have one amazing player. And so, I would love to add Myles Garrett. Like, don't get me wrong. I hope that happens. Don't get it twisted. But there's other ways to do it. And like I said, if you give me Josh Sweat, Deatrich Wise, Bobby Brown, and then you draft the defensive end and you draft the defensive tackle with those early picks, you are in a really good spot to have not only more depth, but more impact, but also upside with a lot of younger players. So sign me up for something like that as a perfectly good consolation prize should the Myles Garrett thing not come to fruition. All right, on the other side of it, I want to talk about Khalil Mack. I think we have to. There's another player that's interesting to me and a buyer beware guy that I hope the Bills do not sign. So we'll talk about that coming up here on the other side of it. Folks, be sure to stick with us. You've probably heard of Chewy. They really do have everything that you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. Whether you're shopping for food, treats, or even pet healthcare, Chewy makes it fast, easy, and affordable. With over 100,000 products from all your favorite brands, Chewy has everything your pet needs, from food and treats to toys, beds, and grooming. And it's not just for dogs and cats. They've got supplies for birds, fish, reptiles, and small pets too. Chewy also makes it easy to manage your pet's health with prescriptions, telehealth, vet visits, and even in-person vet clinics rolling out nationwide. Auto ship, folks, that's a game changer. You can set up automatic deliveries for food, treats, or any essentials so that you never run out. You can easily change or cancel your auto ships at any time. Chewy has everything that you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. Right now, you can save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewy.com or clicking the link in the description. Save $20 on your first order with free shipping by clicking the link in the description. Minimum purchase required. New customers only. Terms and conditions apply. See site for complete details. All right, I want to talk about another player that I wouldn't mind, and that's Hassan Reddick. He turns 31 in September, first-round pick of the Cardinals back in 2017, 6'1", 240. I mean, this past year was just a fiasco with the Jets, and so he's obviously a free agent, and he's certainly not striking while the iron's hot. This was a lost year for him this past year with everything that went down with the Jets and not being able to get a new deal done. But when you look at what this guy did from 2020 through 2023, a 4-year stretch, 50.5 sacks, 51 tackles for loss, 13 forced fumbles. I mean, that's why he wanted that new deal last year that he never got. And I think a consequence and potentially a benefit to the Bills is that 2024 happened, and you could probably get him for a whole lot less. I've seen some estimates. SpotRack is saying between 11 and 12 million per season. I would not mind Hassan Reddick on the, Leonard Floyd type deal that the Bills signed a couple of years ago. And, I think in a world where you move on from Von Miller, swapping him out with the savings you really get from moving on from Miller, give that to Hassan Reddick to go with the Josh Sweat, to go with all the other stuff I said, a Dietrich Wise. Now all of a sudden you're talking about maybe drafting a receiver or a corner early or a safety. Flexibility. I like it. And so Hassan Reddick is definitely a player that you could talk me into. I would not be disappointed about that one. Let's talk about Khalil Mack. This is a popular one. Of course, high pick out of University of Buffalo, has had a great career. He's 34, actually just turned 34 a couple of weeks ago, and had a good season last year. 6 sacks, 52 pressures, 14.5% pass rush win rate. Here's the challenge with Khalil Mack, and this is why I'm not enamored with the idea. SpotRack estimates $23.6 million a season. PFF has it at $22.5 million. That's a ton of money for a 34-year-old pass rusher. Khalil Mack's a good football player, and I'm sure he'll have a good season. But you need to cut that number in half, maybe even more, for this to make a lick of sense to me. I mean, for this Bills team and the path forward, these are the players I kind of want to stay away from. Darius Slay's another one, and not to spoil anything I have to talk about in the next segment, but I get it. He's had a great career, but he's 34. You really want to commit resources to a player and just cross your fingers that the wheels aren't going to fall off? I mean, the Bills traded for Amari Cooper, and I think Amari Cooper can still play, but you're lying if you didn't see athletic decline out of Amari Cooper compared to previous years. And we're talking about 34 years old. It's just not where I want to see the Bills invest. It would be cool, right? University of Buffalo, come on home, play with Cam Lewis and Jamarcus Ingram and Joe Andreessen. Like, the rule of cool says sign Khalil Mack. The rule of smart cap management and managing things in a limited resource environment doesn't really have me overly eager to do this. Now, like I said, if you get this down to what we're talking about for like Hassan Reddick, 10 to 12 million, sure. Mid-20s, crazy to me. Here's the buyer beware guy that I don't want anything to do with. It's Chase Young. Chase Young turns 26 in April. Commanders' former number 2 overall pick back in 2020. He was the defensive rookie of the year his first season. Boy, has he been rough since. He wound up tearing his knee up his second year, and I just don't think he's ever looked the same. And I watched his Saints tape just to kind of get an idea because I'm looking for upside, right? So the 2 players that I really wanted to dive into the tape was Josh Sweat and Chase Young, and I watched those players back to back, and boy, what a night and day difference. Chase Young is a slow burn pass rusher that plays tall, just kind of wants to look in the backfield and then chase the football. He's just not a fundamentally sound player. I wouldn't touch him. I wouldn't touch him. And now you're talking about a guy that has just been on a bunch of teams, right? He was on the Commanders. They trade him to the 49ers. Been on the Saints. Now he's going to be on another team. You're talking about a lot of teams for a young pass rusher. Teams aren't letting guys like this just bounce around. And again, more than anything, watch the Saints tape. Watch it. It's not good. It doesn't excite me at all. Slow burn, plays tall. Everything is reactionary. Nothing is instinctive. Not a fan. Not a fan what I saw from Chase Young. So those are my favorite ideas at defensive end. There's other players I'd like. I'm not going to talk about all 50 free agents available, but I mean, Derek Barnett is a good player as like a third or fourth defensive end. Caleb on Chason certainly showed some juice this past year with what he was able to get done. There's some upside swings. Think about a Malcolm Kuntz, and obviously he missed all of last year with a knee. What does that contract look like? Are you going to pay him for what he did 2 years ago? That could be dicey, but if you tell me you get Malcolm Kuntz from 2 years ago, you're absolutely in love with that. Yeah, there's different players that I wouldn't mind, but in terms of my favorite options, it is Josh Sweat comfortably. I like the idea of Dietrich Wise in the DeJuan Smoot role, and you could certainly talk me into Hassan Reddick, and Khalil Mack would be cool, but not for $23-24 million. That's got to make a lot more sense for the Bills. And look, that's a huge chunk, and he's not going to play that type of snap volume for it to make sense. So it would be cool, but I don't think it would be smart. All right, we have a fascinating conversation to have about cornerbacks. What the right investment is. There's certainly players I really like, but the right thing to do is not something that I've easily discovered. So we'll talk through it here on the other side of it. Folks, be sure to stick with me. I am fascinated to find out what the Bills choose to do at cornerback. Obviously, the need is glaring for a guy opposite of Christian Benford. And I think Rasul Douglas showed us last year that there's age on him. There's athletic decline. Kyer Elam, I know he's young, right? He turns 24 in May, but he hasn't done anything that inspires any level of confidence that he's ready to go as a starter. And so how do you attack this? This is where I struggle. Do you go make a decent signing and get an answer? You can't get a big answer everywhere. You can't have a big ticket answer at receiver, defensive end, defensive tackle, and corner. Like, that's just not realistic. And for a team and a coach in Sean McDermott that has routinely been able to get a lot out of corners, right? Whether it's draft picks exceeding what they were drafted to be. Think about Josh Norman. Think about Christian Benford as glaring examples there. Late stage players coming in. Peanut Tillman did this for him. Drayton Florence did this for him. You've seen that happen. You've seen, guys that are still playing at a high level come in and play at a high level. Think about a guy like Rasul Douglas and what he was able to do in his first stint in Buffalo, the first half year that he was in Buffalo. Like, they've been able to figure it out, and they haven't always had to or really ever had to make a sizable investment. And so if you look at these primary needs and you start to ask yourself, well, where can you go an economic path and get an answer? You could probably talk yourself into corner. Because I can't get this team a $20 million a year corner, defensive tackle, defensive end, and receiver. That's not realistic. So where can you make a concession? Maybe it's corner. But I do have a couple of names that I really like. And my two favorite names, and you could flip a coin on which one I like more. We'll start with this one, Charvarius Ward. Turns 29 in May. UDFA, actually, of the Cowboys in 2018, came up with the Chiefs. Then he left in free agency, signed with the 49ers, was even better with the 49ers. 6'1", 198 pounds, 32 and a quarter inch arms, 10 and an eighth inch hands. And I have all the respect in the world for Charvarius Ward as a really good starting corner. In fact, my comparison for Christian Benford has been Charvarius Ward. That should paint a good picture for you on the type of player that Ward is. And I mean, this past season was really challenging for him. He lost his 1-year-old daughter unexpectedly, and it was a challenging year. He's even come out and said that he's got to get out of California. So he's going to play for a new team next year. And I think there's just a very logical fit here. You know, Ward's a guy that can play press man, zone, off man. He tackles. He takes away the football. I think he's a stud. I think he's absolutely a stud. And this is a guy that is used to playing for contending teams and going on deep postseason runs. 17 playoff starts already. From 2019 to 2023, he played in at least 3 playoff games every single season. And in 2018, he played in 2. Talk about a guy that just knows exactly what to expect. That I think if the Bills get Ward and Benford, that would comfortably be the best corner tandem yet under McDermott. Spot Rack has his contract coming in at $15 million. PFF says 14.5. 2 years, $30 million. It's expensive. But you talk about a perfect fit, proven performer. It just comes down to what type of investment do the Bills want to make at this position. If they want to go with the big investment, give me Charvarius Ward. Another player that I really like that's going to come in a little less than Charvarius Ward is Paulson Adebo from the Saints. He turns 26 in July, so we like that, a younger player. 3rd-round pick by the Saints, has been a starter since they drafted him. I loved him at Stanford. 6'1", 198 pounds, 31.5-inch arms, 10-inch hands, 9.53 RAS score. Had a good year last year. 10 pass defended, 3 interceptions, passer rating of 67 allowed against his coverage. In fact, the last 2 seasons, the passer rating against his coverage has been under 70. He's been really good. He tackles. I'm a big fan of Paulson Adebo, and the ball production pops. 52 career starts, 43 pass breakups, 10 interceptions. And Ryan Nielsen, who's a senior defensive assistant for the Bills, was part of the coaching staff in New Orleans that drafted Paulson Adebo. And the first year, Nielsen was the assistant head coach. The second year, he was the co-defensive coordinator. So there's familiarity there. And he's an ascending young player. And the thing about the Saints is they don't have any money. And they drafted Kool-Aid McKinstry last year. They have Alante Taylor. You know, I think they have to kind of figure it out without Paulson Adebo. That's why he's hitting the market. And he had an injury last year. He had a broken femur in week 7. He missed the rest of the year. I think he should be fine from that. So that's something to be mindful of, though. He has had some penalties, 35 penalties in 52 career games. That's something to be mindful of. But Spot Rack says 11 million. PFF has it at 13. I'm a big fan. You know, I think you might even be able to leverage the year that he had as a young player, you know, come in for a prove it year, you know, 1 year, 5 million with incentives that could take it to 12. I don't know, something like that. I'm just getting big brain here. But if you told me it was Paulson Adebo versus Kyer Elam versus Jamarcus Ingram versus a mid-round draft pick for CB2, I'd be fine with that. I really like Paulson Adebo. So, like, big ticket Charvarius Ward would love that. Paulson Adebo would also love that. There's some bargain bin players. Actually, let me tell you about DJ Reed. DJ Reed from the Jets, that's another player that's going to come in around 13 to 15 million a season. I think he's a great player, like clean fit to the Bills, can play man coverage. He tackles, he plays the run. I like DJ Reed, very competitive, like how he competes and like he contests everything, every route, every throw, he contests it. And I love that about him. Again, it just comes down to how much money do you want to sink into this spot? And if they do want to sink in some money and Charvarius Ward and Paulson Adebo weren't the routes they wanted to go, all right, well, then we could talk about DJ Reed. There are a couple of bargain bin players that I like. Christian Fulton, been a fan of him ever since LSU. Then he went to the Titans, and he had a couple of good years, but his last season wasn't very good. Just like that, the year that Mike Vrabel, his last season there, like everything just was not working, including Christian Fulton. But he went to the Chargers this past year and looked like the player I thought he would be when I became a fan of him at LSU. He's 26. Spot Rack says $5.75 million. Wouldn't mind that at all, right? If you're telling me that you can't, there's a cap on how much you want to spend for this position, and you have to go bargain. Give me Christian Fulton because I think he's a good player. He's young, and I think there's a lot of upside there. Another guy, if you're looking for just, hey, you just need to get through a year, Ahkello Witherspoon, 29 years old. He played last year for the Rams at a 1-year, $1.125 million. He came in and kind of, once they realized that Trey White couldn't play, they signed this guy, and he really elevated that spot. And I think he's kind of been an underappreciated starter for a while in the league. And so if you wanted to go, 1-year inexpensive deal, get through the season, again, pairing him with a Kyer Elam or, some other types of, draft picks, something like that, I can see that as a logical path forward. So when you think about all right, you're going to have to figure it out with some bigger ticket things, Christian Fulton and Ahkello Witherspoon are two guys that I really like. So there you have it. We've previewed at least my favorite targets at the primary needs for the Buffalo Bills. And the rest of this week is going to be fun because coming up on Friday, you're going to get my mock offseason. And so I'm going to go through and do everything. We'll create cap space. We'll do extensions. We'll sign outside free agents. We'll do a 7-round mock draft. We'll do a roster projection and kind of just give you a blueprint for what's possible. That's really what I want to show you. I'm not going to accurately predict every move that Brandon Beane makes, but I want to give you an idea of what he can do. And that's the thing, is everything will check out and be completely possible under the Bills, circumstances that they have with the cap. So something I do every year. You have that to look forward to end of the week. All right, folks, hope you enjoyed this. Hopefully you're feeling better about how the Bills can address the needs that they have. And as I always say, just don't marry yourself to any one idea, right? There's so much that goes into player acquisition, so many different options. And just because one path doesn't go the way you want it to doesn't mean that there's not good pivot points and different ideas that you can explore. And have an open mind. I think that's the biggest encouragement I can give you as we're getting ready to navigate the big player acquisition pieces of the offseason, is have an open mind and let the puzzle come together, right? Let it come together. Don't be that person that when the Bills sign some journeyman guard on day one of free agency that you start throwing your hands in the air and start yelling and tweeting and getting all mad because it's not every answer that you wanted immediately. There's been plenty of years, even for the Eagles, where they're making moves, right up until camp, right in camps, trading for a Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Things like this happen. And so I'm excited to see how this plays out. The Bills have more flexibility than they've had in a while when it comes to the offseason. And these are some of the best ideas that I have. And I look forward to talking about it all with you as it happens all next week and in the coming months as we see what the 2025 Buffalo Bills are going to look like. All right, folks, that's it for today. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.